Okay, with apologies for everyone who tunes in now, the first half an hour of our discussion didn't get recorded. Um, so the next area of anguish that we're wrestling with these days has to do with autocracy and oligarchy. Now, those who left the domains of the Anunnaki, and maybe some of them never really got there, but they simply drifted off from the compounds in Southern Africa and Southeastern Africa, where Homo sapiens was originally crafted. You know, some just drifted away and never had much exposure to Anunnaki civilization, and others who left Mesopotamia and Egypt, maybe because, as been suggested, they were less suited. They were more of nature, independent, rebellious. Who knows? But those who left, seems to me, were able to reconnect with the Homo erectus consciousness within themselves, that the earthy, the terrestrial part of their biological and spiritual nature. And they evolved self-governance, which in a variety of ways is really pretty consistent in, across the indigenous world. Governance characterized by respect for all members of the community, stratification, social stratification that was relatively fluid, no fixed classes or castes. Leaders chosen by consensus and ejected by consensus. Leaders serving the community, not the other way around. And spirituality as a common resource, as a unifying element in the culture. Now, civilization largely did not work this way, but attempted to at times. We through, I mean, the Greeks tried it, the Romans tried it with less success. Doesn't look like the Egyptians did it all. But with democratic practices, with representative councils, they connected to some extent with the terrestrial origins and terrestrial consciousness, but much less securely and less successfully. Those attempts always gave way to a return to the first principle of social organization under the Anunnaki: leadership by right, stratification being rather rigid, the populace serving the leader, and religion being a way of controlling the populace. Now, supporting the ruler, and at times competing with the ruler, or the nobles, the elite, and retaining the original scheme of a deified ruler or a deity ruler. there has to be one ruler, even if he's only a figurehead. So we have seen in human history many cycles of going back and forth, autocracy accompanied by oligarchy and some play between those two forces, alternating with democracy and representative government. Can a democratic organization of society persist and succeed indefinitely? I mean, that was Lincoln's question, in the Gettysburg Address, can any nation so conceived and so, I forget the exact quote, but, long endure, and he was quite aware that, it was all in danger of coming apart. And that was the basic question. In the 1860s, they had witnessed all of the movements away from autocracy and royalty, the revolutions in Europe of 1932, 1948, they'd all failed. And the kings and the monarchs were coming back into power, and they were all rooting, for the defeat of democracy in America. So what keeps it going? What are the requisites to keep it going? One seems to be a continuous universal conversation about governance itself. How should we do things? How are we doing things? How can we do things better? Now, that at a large scale, for a country of our size, would be a huge upscaling of the principle of the communal council sitting in the lodge or in the big teepee, with everybody talking up, what's going on and how are we to manage ourselves and what are the problems. That was a very, very active conversation on this continent, starting around 1760, maybe a little bit earlier, and going on in an almost tribal way at every level of the society, in the courts, in legislatures, in taverns, in coaches going between the cities, in sermons. It was a conversation that really astounded visitors from Europe who've never seen anything like this going on, and probably at this scale, in a civilized society, it probably never went on before on Earth, and it continued all the way through the Revolutionary period, the constitutional period, began to through Jackson's administration, and then began to break down. Conversation broke down, and of course, the Civil War was the result. And has it ever really been restored? We certainly don't have a uniform conversation now. We have two conversations that have nothing to do with each other. So another aspect of society, which seems to be essential for a democratic principle to continue, is a trust in the community, a basic trust in the community and in each other. It's that it's not as if it's out of reach. At times, this nation, has totally pulled together in the face of external threat. um, there's something that's just emerged, just got reported last few days, that may be maybe like a germ around which some unification and mutual trust can develop, and that is people of all stripes, high, low, left, right, are all joining in wanting to welcome and support the Afghan refugees. So, we can do that. We have done that. With the right leadership, we could have done it around the pandemic. It could have been a unifying rather than a dividing experience. So that's necessary. And the other thing I think which is essential is for life to be good enough, conditions to be good enough. That's why, that's one reason why democracy could be sustained as long as possible, in this land, because the land is so rich. So much productivity possible here. But life and nature, we have to have a positive orientation to them and to our own sexuality and to our own sociability. We have to be positive about life. So probably one of the things needed for longevity of democratic principle is a healing from our communal trauma state, because traumatization has become a constant in human civilized life, and there too, my hope is that the story of our original traumatization as slave soldiers in the endless war of the Anunnaki lords, that being endlessly repeated, passed on through culture, through tradition, through what got embedded in the monotheisms, through the collective unconscious. That traumatization, when we identify the origin of it, that can begin to loosen its hold. But one of the things that brings back the ruler from above, the guy in charge, is the promise of getting relief from our trauma. He's going to fix it. He's going to make things right. And he's going to love you. He's going to love you.
Mike, it sounds like he's going to love you. It sounds a little bit, this may be too far afield, too big a reach, but it sounds like a really close working relationship between corporate enterprise and government agency enterprise. That the association is going to be so good if you can get your business projects aligned with government intention or motivation. And the love is the profit level. It's possible with that association. I think that's a major problem.
it's, it is, to me, that seems eminently possible, hard to bring it about, but yeah, things, I guess it has happened, like in World War II, that was
Yes.
uh, uh, the you know it can happen obviously in toxic ways, the the
That's what I was referring to.
yeah the
I was
yeah
momentarily going to blur your optimism a little bit.
yeah what's it's called, mercantilism, which is
Yeah, the British East India with the green light from the crown
right,
and military support when required.
uh, either their own forces, the
Yes.
East India forces, or imperial forces,
Yeah.
depending,
Yeah.
uh,
I think it's a problem that I have not read about. Uh, I'm less widely read than I used to be on current events, but uh, modern Western governments, the ones I'm familiar with, offered too many, way too big prizes for working with the government and having projects with the government. And the prize levels are just humongous from an individual or a family viewpoint. I mean, just huge. The possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue yearly, reaching into billions. But when the greater the income level is, the greater the association with a government project of one sort or another. It's not just the US, I mean, it's France, England, it's the Western world. Well, it's the civilized world, let's say. Don't want to keep China out of this, where it's like really obvious. Your business enterprise in China is linked in with a government program and a green lighted intention from the central party, something like that. You are, let's say, just pick a number, 80% assured of success. It's not allied. You are 80% assured of failure sooner or later. And that in the West, it's just a little piece like that. Less certain. And
well, the attempts at the alliance is the entire class of lobbyists in Washington.
Astounding. I think much of the public really has no notion really of what that river of influence is. It's bigger than the Mississippi. And that's what I mean. In the US, for example, the prizes used to be in nature, allied with something natural that was happening. The flow of the Mississippi, the towns that sprang up alongside, and the trade that occurred between them, the flow across into the West, the flow from urban areas into country, rural areas and back and forth with the 1800s. New York City basically is a prime time example. Boston, another one, right? It was pieces of nature were involved. Now it's the central state. It's all a human fabrication. It's just that some of the operators die after a while, but everything else is a human fabrication. And that's the biggest single prize so far. If you shift the prize, the value, someplace else, maybe things will go better. But as long as the prizes are derived from association with the gods, the authoritative gods, that's the central state.
Absolutely.
It's an issue.
In excuse me, um, that and that just what you're talking about is a light that we can shine on the pandemic too, because Homo erectus was a part of nature. It was in harmony with nature. Homo erectus didn't have to care about the environment. He was the environment. He was in the environment. There was, he didn't have to care. Caring was in them. The Anunnaki, as I see it, they didn't care. And as I put the timeline together, that came in part out of their having lived for what I take would be millions of years in an artificial world where everything, well, all natural processes, vegetation and, food production, all natural processes were managed by by them. Okay. So it was a world with no sun, a world with no planetary rhythms, all, and out in the dark and the deep, deep cold, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't have any feel for it, for living in nature. And of course they came to exploit for minerals, They didn't come to start all over again. They didn't say, oh, let's go to this green world and make a new life for ourselves. As a matter of fact, from what we can tell, their culture didn't change one bit from when they first arrived until when they left about 500,000 years later. They were doing the same shit, if you'll excuse me, to themselves and to the planet. Reeva's talking in the background. Okay, we have a small example of that kind of with the English colonists who came to North America from a landscape that was a lot of it was turned into fields, and they had,
it was managed,
very much managed, had been for centuries, along with serfdom and suppression, and they must have had a terrible dread of the dark forests, which they cleared as much as they could. And they imposed a civilized agriculture instead of learning from the Indians, which they would have helped them survive enormously. No, they didn't do that. They imported a way of doing things that was, for the time, was mechanized. And I think that's a model of what must have happened on this planet. That the ruling beings who came were really out of touch with the riches around them, other than the mineral riches that they craved. So I would say that looking at this, this trial that we're going through and still going through, that our public health institutions and practices are a reflection of our alignment with nature. They're a manifestation of our Homo erectus being responsible, caring, alert, and our neglect of the public health institutions and processes is a reflection of our not caring, the Anunnaki arrogance and detachment that's in us also. And that's part of what has played out in this horrendous drama. And we're seeing it in some of the different attitudes that people are manifesting. And it's no coincidence that some of the most hurtful attitudes, were stimulated and fertilized by a malignant leader. Okay, so so that to me is a big piece of this pandemic tragedy. And here's another one, which is maybe more speculative, but maybe just as true. Okay, the word geo for Earth. We know that it comes from Ki in Sumerian. That was the name for the planet. The Anunnaki were those who came from heaven, on, to Earth, Ki. And like most names, it has meaning. And Ki in Sumerian meant hollowed out. This is the hollowed out planet. And that's reflecting the history recorded in the tablets of the impact of one of Nibiru's moons with this globe that we're on when it was in a different orbit, when it was where the asteroid belt is now. This enormous impact, creating, it's my hypothesis, but I don't think I'm the only one, creating the basin of the Pacific Ocean, which occupies about a third of the surface of the globe. And were it not for the ocean floor, which is built up over the eons with volcanic flow, with lava, without that lava floor, the Pacific would be 12 miles deep. Yeah, that is quite a hole, quite a hollowing out. So, in addition to the asteroid impacts that we know about, this is the biggest of them all, creating what is really a wounded planet. And the field of this planet, again, this is not everybody's belief system, but I think I'm not the only one with this one, living in this one. The field of this planet is carrying that traumatization, or the serial traumatizations, especially that biggest one. And now we, humankind, are the wounding force that's operating. We are reenacting the wounding of the planet, producing what's been called the Earth's sixth mass extinction event. It's horrifying to consider, that the rate of the extinction of species right now, the rate at which species are disappearing, is 1,000 times the rate of natural extinction during stable periods on the planet. Only now, the traumatizing force is us. It, to me, is plausible that this deadly virus is a material response of the field of the planet to our own malfeasance. if you consider God to be not a being in the mold of the Anunnaki gods, okay, but as the immaterial, infinite intelligence of the cosmos, then the concept of punishment by God is not so absurd. Particularly if it means the elimination or reduction of a life-destructive force. If it means the modulation of chaotic, undisciplined, destructiveness resulting from untreated trauma. So that may be what's going on. Linda, who couldn't be here today, pointed out to me that that is the way viruses operate. Marine viruses operate with fish populations. That when a population gets too big and is straining its niche, that the viruses become more active and they control the population of the huge schools of fish. And we do know that the viruses evolved along with us. So they're part of our system. They're not, totally foreign. Matter of fact, we have a good deal of viral DNA in our DNA. That, that may be another way of us understanding what's going on. And if that's kind of warning, then we may be witnessing the natural principle that the warnings get louder and louder if you don't respect them. So this one's pretty loud. But this picture of the Earth as a severely wounded planet comes to us from the Mesopotamian tale. We don't. I don't know that anybody would put that together. Would put together the asteroid belt and the Pacific Ocean, in the way that the tablets do, and the scribes recorded what the Anunnaki told them about the history of this planet. So, oh, the history of this planet was it got sorry, it's too complicated. Too complicated. The history of the planet was folded into the story of the history of the universe, when the monotheistic faith was beginning to develop, and the scribes were developing a story for God creating the universe. But it's a bit too much to try to capsulize now. Okay. I think that was, well, just as an extension of the, pandemic discussion, the other, other aspect of our current horror stories is a degradation of the natural world showing up in the floods and tornadoes and the drought and fires and everything. And you can parallel what I said, about the public health issue, with the Anunnaki coming from an artificial world, not really caring about this one, how that can take us over. So in us, the Anunnaki are exploiting without any consciousness of what's going on. The humans, originally born to mine minerals for the Anunnaki, and to provide abundance and luxury for them, that consciousness is churning along. And the Homo erectus, who got out competed and defeated and as a species became extinct, their consciousness shows up most strongly in the native peoples and the indigenous cultures, which haven't been totally obliterated. I think that they are a part of our salvation. They're doing it for us right now. We're trying to stop the Line 3 pipeline, in northern Minnesota, or is it North Dakota? So it's a pretty dark story at present, but not without a lot of light if we go looking for it and nurturing it. Well, I want to thank everybody who joins in these monthly meetings. Those who are here tonight, and a few who are going to be listening in to the partial recording. That's going to get zoomable, because it forces me to say, okay, what's relevant right now? How do we make use of this right now? So I'm glad to be forced to do this, because I have to say each after each month, I say, God, what can possibly talk about next time? I think we covered everything, and then here we are again. The relevance keeps showing itself. And maybe in another month we'll have some new light with everything that's been going on.